ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So today we're going to start with on Vedartha Sangraha. Vedartha Sangraha is probably Ramanuja's first work, and there are several translations in English. One very scholarly one by a Dr. J.A.B. van Buitenen, which is quite technical. There's also by an Indian scholar, S.S. Raghavachar, who is quite a famous scholar. He's also done Madhva's Vishnu Tattva Vinirnaya, and he's published a few. He's also written a separate book, which is an introduction to Vedartha Sangraha, which is very useful. All of these are available, and you can just get in touch with me if anybody wants a link to download them. There's also one by Raja Gopal Iyengar, and so I think today I'd like to start going through this edition by Raja Gopal Iyengar. It was written in 1956. So let's have a look at that one. Vedartha Sangraha of Sri Ramanuja, the author of Sri Bhashya. So unlike other Vedantic acharyas like Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, and some other Vedantic acharyas, all the Vedantic acharyas and the leaders of or the main acharyas of sampradayas, in order to establish their sampradaya on the basis of strong Vedantic evidence, have written commentaries on the Brahma Sutras. Ramanuja has written 3 commentaries on the Brahma Sutras. His most famous one is Sri Bhashya. He also wrote Vedanta Sara and Vedanta Deepa. And not only on the Vedanta Sutras, but also on the major Upanishads, of which there are between 8 and 13 major Upanishads out of the 108 that we normally have heard of. There's a list of 108 Upanishads given in Muktik Upanishad. The Upanishads being the philosophical portion of the Vedas, or strictly speaking, Vedanta. Upanishad means Vedanta. So the Brahma Sutras or the Vedanta Sutras, as they're also called, right, by Badarayana, also known as Vedavyasa. They give us Upanishadic philosophy in a logical order. The Upanishads teach us Upanishadic philosophy perhaps in a different order, and so to systematize the philosophy of the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras were written, which are very short aphorisms. Sutra means aphorisms or thread. Just like we have email threads today, they have different threads on different subjects, and those subjects in the Brahma Sutras are called adhikaranas, right? So different subject is called an adhikarana. So each Vedantic acharya, each follower of a school of Vedanta, or teacher of a school of Vedanta, will have commentaries on the Upanishads, commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, which also has to do with the Upanishads. And the third book, very important philosophical book, which they write a commentary on, is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, of course, is 18 chapters out of the Mahabharata, which is an itihasa, which is, of course, Shmriti and not Shruti. So two of these commentaries have to do with the Shrutis, and one has to do with the Shmritis, Bhagavad Gita. In each case, each acharya tries to make a commentary to support his particular flavor of Vedanta. There's also some acharyas, and actually all the acharyas, they take another thing from Mahabharata and make a commentary on it, and that is the Vishnu Sahasranam, the 1,000 names of Vishnu. But that's less well known. Usually people talk about what's called the Prasthana Traya or Prasthana Trayi. Traya or Trayi means 3. Prasthana means principal philosophical books of the schools of Vedanta. So all of the Hindu schools or Vaishnava schools that follow Vedanta as their philosophical basis have these commentaries. Now, Ramanuja is no exception to this. And so Ramanuja wrote his Sri Bhashyas and his Vedanta Sar, Vedanta Deepa. And he also, on the Brahma Sutras, and he also wrote a commentary called Gita Bhashya on the Bhagavad Gita. His predecessor, his Param Guru, Alavanda or Yamunacharya, had written a small treatise of 32 verses called Vedartha Sangraha. So Sangraha means gathering together the information, gathering together the information. So as I just said, the Upanishads have got lots of different information about spiritual things, but they're not gathered together in one source. So in order to gather together all the information from the Vedas or the Vedartha, right? The meaning of the Vedas, the meaning of the Vedas is Vedartha. Into one place, Ramanuja wrote Vedartha Sangraha. Now, Vedartha Sangraha is written by Ramanuja as his explanation of the Upanishads. Now, later on, there was an acharya in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya called Ranga Ramanuja, who wrote about the Upanishad. He did commentaries on the main Upanishads, just like Madhvacharya and Shankaracharya and some of the other Vedantic acharyas had. Ramanuja didn't do that. In order to put it all together, he made this one book, Vedartha Sangraha. So if somebody asks, well, the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya Ramanuja didn't write commentaries on the Upanishads. No, he didn't write on each and every Upanishad, but he took the knowledge of the Upanishads, brought it all together, and put it in a succinct form, in a very concise form. Okay, so that's what Vedartha Sangraha means. It means the meaning of the Vedas brought together. And of course, it's written in Sanskrit by Ramanuja. Okay, so this is translated by M.R. Rajgopal Iyengar in 1956 and published in Kumbakonam, which is quite near Sri Ranga. So let's have a look at the preface. So he's going to explain a little bit about the book, about this edition. In this English rendering of Sri Ramanuja's Vedartha Sangraha, I've tried to be as close and faithful to the original as the idiom of English language would permit. So he's trying to be faithful to the original in his translation. But when we translate anything, especially a philosophical book, from one language to another language, especially from Sanskrit, which is a highly technical language, into another language which may not have all the technical jargon of Sanskrit to do with philosophy, he's tried to get the meaning as correct as possible. Here and there, I felt that the addition of words, phrases, and sentences would make the author's meaning clearer. So I have inserted them in the body of the text within brackets. So if we see any text that's in brackets, it means it's been inserted by the translator to try and give us a better idea or a clearer understanding of the meaning of the book, right, than a literal word-for-word translation would give. Because we've seen anybody who has has looked at any translations before will realize that if you try to translate books word for word, you miss the meaning sometimes. Okay, so in the section dealing with the doctrines of the Mimamsakas, so who are the Mimamsakas? The word Mimamsa means discussion or deliberation on a particular topic. So let's say a bunch of scholars get together and they have a particular topic and they debate it, they talk about it, they research it, they discuss it, and then they come to some conclusion. That is what Mimamsa means, right? Now, there are two types of Mimamsa in Sanskrit. There's the Purva Mimamsa and the Uttara Mimamsa. So Purva just means the prior, and Uttara means the after. So before and after, the first and the second form of Vedanta, of Mimamsa discussion. So Purva Mimamsa is a discussion of the parts of the Vedas that have to do with ritual, specifically the fire ritual, which is an offering of an offering of different items like ghee and grains into the fire, and different Vedic sacrifices, which are found in the hymns of the Samhitas of the Vedas are used, and the Aranyakas and the Brahmanas tell us how to perform these particular sacrifices. So this is considered a deliberation. The Purva Mimamsa is a deliberation on that part of the Vedas, the part which is called the part about sacrifices and the part about performing fire rituals. That is called Purva Mimamsa. Another name for Purva Mimamsa is Karma Kanda. Karma Kanda. It's called Karma Kanda because it is the Kanda, it's the section, if we divide the Vedas into two Kandas. So it's the section which deals with karmas, with different activities or actions that are performed by people, different sacrifices, Shrauta sacrifices. Okay, so it's called Karma Kanda, right? And it has to do with attaining moksha, but also attaining fruits like dharma, artha, and kama, right? Sense gratification, economic development, and religiosity. So the original, okay, so that is one type of Mimamsaka. Another type of Mimamsaka is the Uttaramimamsa. Uttaramimamsaka deals with the philosophy of the Upanishads. So another name for Uttaramimamsa is Vedanta. So we have Purva Mimamsa, which means Kamakanda, and Uttaramimamsa, which means Vedanta. Here, when he uses the word Mimamsa, Mimamsaka are people who follow Mimamsa. So he means the Purva Mimamsas. He doesn't mean the Vedantins. He means the Karmakandis. So in this section, dealing with the doctrines of the Karmakandis, now the Vedantic Acharyas, the ones who follow Vedanta, they try to refute. A lot of times they try to refute what the Karmakandis say, because these are two separate schools of philosophy out of the 6 main schools of philosophy coming out of India. So we have Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva, and Uttaramimamsa, or Karmakanda and Vedanta. These are the 6 main schools of Indian philosophy. So here we're just going to be talking about Vedanta, but however, a lot of talking about Vedanta, when we start talking about Vedanta and we start talking about the Upanishads, there will be doctrines of the Purva Mimamsakas, right, the Karmakandis, which will be refuted by the Uttaramimamsakas. So the Karmakandis will have their doctrines refuted by the Vedantins. So this is Shankaracharya refuted the Vedantins, Ramanuja Madhva, all of the Vedantins refuted the Karmakandis. So when the original is too terse to be easily understood, so sometimes these arguments can become very laden with a lot of difficult terminology. So we say that they became too terse, and therefore we try to make them. He's trying to make them simplified so we can understand it. Because in this book, Ramanuja is going to criticize not only the Purva Mimamsakas, not only the Karmakandis, but he's also going to criticize different Vedantins or Uttaramimamsakas, right? Like Shankara, whatever. He's going to Beda. He'll criticize Yadav Prakash and Bhaskara and those people. So these are all different schools. We don't need to go through them here. Later on, we'll be introduced to some of these opposing theories, and we'll see what Ramanuja says about them. So anyway, he's trying to make it easier for us, the translator. I have therefore made the translation explanatory, as I felt that a faithful and close translation might not be clear enough. When longer explanations are necessary, they are given separately as notes in small type. Okay. So I am bound to express my deep indebtedness to the late Sri Vangipuram Vasudevacharya Swami's excellent edition of Vedartha Sangraha in Grantha script. Grantha script is an old Tamil-like looking script, which was used for Sanskrit, with Tamil translation and notes. So he's saying where he did his research for this present volume, this present translation. Sri K.S. Patracharya MA, scrutinized the English rendering with the Sanskrit original by his side and drew my attention to several omissions as well as inaccuracies. To go through an original treatise and make suggestions for its improvement is comparatively easy, but to go through a translation and compare it with the original word by word and sentence by sentence with a view to examining its accuracy requires much greater concentration and practice. Only those who have done this kind of scrutiny can appreciate the trouble involved in it. It is therefore impossible for me to thank him adequately for his kindness in having undertaken this task. My grateful thanks are due also to my guru. So he offers his pranams, he offers his respects to his guru, Sri Ubaya Vedanta. So Ubaya Ve means Ubaya Vedanta. Sometimes you say Uve, right? Most Sri Vaishnava acharyas, they'll put Uve before their name, Ubaya Vedanta, because they are the followers of two Vedantas, whereas other Vedantins only follow the Sanskrit Vedanta. But the Sri Vaishnavas consider that the Nalayir Divya Prabandham, the 4,000 verses, Prabandhas of the Alvars in Tamil, are considered to also be, like the Vedanta, equal in understanding and philosophy to the Vedanta of the Upanishads. So Ubaya Vedanta, Sinamu Srinivasa Patracharya Swami of Kumbakonam, to whom I applied for the clarification of meanings of certain passages. I am grateful also to Sri R. Keshava Iyengar, BABL, advocate, so he's a lawyer, right, of Triplicane, which is in Chennai or Madras, for elucidating a point that I referred to him. And he doesn't mention exactly what that point was. My heartfelt thanks is due to my old friend, Sri K. Vedartha, BABL, also an advocate, also a lot of Brahmins, they became lawyers, right? Because it involves a lot of intellectual understanding of the law or whatever. At Kumbakonam, for helping readily and willingly giving in connection with the reading of the proofs. In conclusion, I'd like to express my warm appreciation and gratitude to Kaveri Color Press for the speedy execution of their part of the work, actually the printers, the people who actually printed the book. Maharaj Gopalacharya. Okay, so here's the table of contents. Table of contents, we just go through the different sections. Basically, we have an introduction. Pages 1 to 35 is an introduction, which is, I think, quite necessary before going into this philosophical work. There has to be some background to explain about Vedantic terms and things. Then we get, in the actual book itself, a brief exposition of Vishishtadvaita philosophy, Vishishtadvaita, which could be called specific monism or specified monism or holistic monism, is Ramanuja's particular flavor or brand of Vedanta, as compared to the Kevala Dvaita or Advaita philosophy of Adi Shankaracharya, or the Dvaita philosophy of Madhvacharya, or the different flavors of Bheda by Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash. So we'll get into all that. Okay, so the brief exposition of Vishishta Dvaita philosophy comes first. And then he jumps right into explaining about the philosophical systems of Advaita. Advaita means non-dual or monism or oneness. Right, and Bheda, difference and oneness. So criticism. So the philosophical systems of Advaita and Bheda. Criticism of Shankara's Advaita. The meaning of Samanadikaranya, right, or grammatical equation or coordination. So those persons who have studied a little bit about grammar will understand that when a word is in apposition, it has the same, when it has the same grammatical, when it has this, especially a noun, if a noun is in the nominative case, let's say, or the vocative case, then when two nouns in the same sentence are in the nominative or the vocative case, they're called in apposition, or they can be equated with each other. So grammatical equation is what we're talking about when we say samanadikaranya. Okay, so it's a technical term, and there's lots of technical terms, and we'll try to explain all the technical terms as we go along. And so then we have refutation of the doctrine of a Brahman Brahman means the Supreme Spirit or the Great Spirit, the Supreme Lord. Sriman Narayana, without attributes or differentiating features, Veda, right? Refutation of Veda means difference. So refutation of the doctrine of Brahman without attributes. So Advaita Shankara will say, many people will say that Brahman or the Supreme actually has no differentiating features or attributes. So that's Ramanuja's argument refuting that. The doctrine of avidya or Maya is against Shruti. So Shruti is, of course, the original Vedas, the Upanishad, meaning the Upanishads, the Upanishadic philosophy. And he's saying here that the doctrine of avidya or Maya, avidya means ignorance, and Maya means illusion, right? Which is specifically not only in Shankara's philosophy, but specifically raised in Shankara's type of Vedanta. He has this idea of avidya and Maya. That's why Advaitins are called, many times they're called Mayavadis, because they speak about Maya. So Maya meaning illusion. So he's going to explain about the doctrine of illusion, the doctrine of ignorance. And he's going to say how it's against the actual meaning of the Vedas. And it's also against reason. So when we try to prove things that are actually true knowledge, we have different things called pramanas, which are epistemologically tools that we use to prove a thing to be real. When we want to prove something to be real, we use sense perception, we use inference or reason or logic, which is what they're talking about here, and we also use quotes from the Upanishads or the Shruti, like that. So he's going to say not only is Maya or avidya against the Vedas, right, against the Upanishads, the Vedanta, but it's also against logical reasoning. Criticism of the doctrine of a single individual. So there are schools out there of philosophy that believe that there's only one living entity, that there's not many living entities. This is called Eka Jiva Vada. Vada simply means Vada means to speak in Sanskrit, to say something. So those philosophers that speak about Eka Jiva, or only one Jiva, one living being, they are called Eka Jiva Vadins, the people who are following that philosophy. So criticism of Shankara's theory of adhyasa or illusory appearance. Shankara has this theory. Basically, he says, he gives the term adhyasa to it. Adhyasa means illusory appearance. It means that that Brahman or the Supreme Spirit has got Maya or ignorance or illusion superimposed upon it, like a covering, right? So without Maya, we would see Brahman as it is, but since somehow or other this adhyasa comes into play, and Maya or avidya covers Brahman, right? So this Ramanuja criticizes that idea. So refutation of the Beta systems of Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash. So there are many Beta systems in different Beta systems in Vedanta, in different Vedantic schools. So we have the type of Bhaskara was probably the first historical Beta system. Then we have Yadava Prakash, who was the Gurukul teacher of Ramanuja himself, who later on became took initiation from Ramanuja, became his disciple, was defeated by Ramanuja. So here we have his system as well. These are two systems of Beta. Later on, we have, for example, the Swabhavika Beta of Nimbarka, and we also have the Achintya Beta of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. These are all different Beta schools. So here Ramanuja will refute Beta systems in general. Of course, he wrote this book 1,000 years ago, so Nimbarka isn't mentioned. Obviously the Gaudiya Beta isn't mentioned because they were not extant at that time. Okay, so but Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash had these schools of Beta or dualism and non-dualism. Okay, so then we have a detailed exposition of Vishishta Dvaita, right? So after knocking down, so the first part of the book is with a quick introduction to Vishishtadvaita, Ramanuja's philosophy. Then we look at all the faults of all these other philosophers, right? All these other Vedantic philosophy schools, right? And then we go straight into a detailed explanation of Vishishtadvaita system. So this follows a very logical way. So first of all, tattva. Tattva means reality, or it means the principles. So Brahman, Jiva. Brahman means the supreme Sriman Narayana, right? Jiva means the individual souls. And Prakriti. Prakriti means matter. So these are the three, and their relationship with one another. This is called tattva, or the principles. Sometimes in Sri Vaishnavism or Vishishtadvaita, we call this Ishvara, Chit, and Achit. Mostly we see Chit Ishvara is what people say. So we have Chit, the Jiva, Achit, Prakriti or matter, and Ishvara, the controller and supporter and creator of both, is Ishvara, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sriman Narayana. Okay, so that's the first thing. And Hita means upaya, also means upaya. Hita and upaya mean the means. The means to what? The means to the goal or liberation. So we haven't mentioned the goal here yet, but the goal of most Vedanta schools is moksha, or there are different purusharthas or goals of human life. And out of them we have, we have freedom from suffering, freedom from poverty. So we have artha, and we have kama and artha, and then we have religiosity, righteousness, morality, right? And then finally we have moksha. Moksha is the fourth one, and frees us from this material world. The concept is that the jiva is bound in this material world, covered with ignorance, and therefore does not understand its true nature. And then its goal is to get free from that ignorance, from that illusion, and to be rightly situated in its pristine glory as a soul, like that. That is moksha. And in Sri Vaishnava terms, moksha means that the individual soul is rightly situated as a servant of the Supreme Lord, which is its constitutional position, and it's serving the Supreme Lord eternally in Sri Vaikuntha. So we're talking about the supreme devotion here, which is termed here as parabhakti, the greatest form of bhakti or devotion. So then we have valid pramanas or sources of knowledge, so which I discussed before: pratyaksha, anumana, shabda, the sense perception, inference or logical reasoning, right, and shruti, the scriptural texts from the Upanishads. The arguments, or from the Prasthanatrayi, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. So the arguments to prove that Narayana, Sriman Narayana, is the supreme Brahman, like that, because amongst different Vedantic schools, people will have different ideas. Some people will say Shiva is the supreme. Some people say Vishnu is the supreme. So here we see that all the Vaishnava Vedantins, they hold Sriman Narayana as the supreme Brahman. So the arguments to prove that Brahman, or the supreme, is both material and instrumental cause, the upadan karna and the nimitta karna. So the word karna means cause. The upadan karna means the material cause, and the nimitta karna means the instrumental cause. So the example is usually given of a pot of clay. If you have clay, a clay pot is made by a potter. So in this case, the idea is that Sriman Narayana, the supreme Brahman, right, is both the potter and the clay, because the potter makes the clay into a pot. So he doesn't make the pot out of himself. But in the case of the universe, God creates the universe out from himself. There is nothing before God. He's the origin of everything. He's the original cause. He is not only making the universe, but he is creating it from himself. So he is the upadan karna and the nimitta karna, the material and instrumental cause. So then we have the criticism of the Mimamsa view. Now, again, when we say Mimamsa, we're talking about Purva Mimamsa, right? The Karma Kandis, the view that the Upanishads are not valid source of knowledge, as they do not prescribe action of any kind. And this is actually false, because there are some what we call vidyas or meditations that are prescribed in the Upanishads to reach moksha or to gain knowledge of the Supreme Brahman Srimanarayana. And so here Ramanuja is going to explain how the Karmakandi idea that the Upanishads are not important, right, but only the texts in the Vedas which tell us to do sacrifices, those are important. That's what the Karmakandi say. Okay, so that's his criticism of that. Then a criticism of the Mimamsa doctrine of apurva or karya. So apurva, karya means doing, and apurva means priority, right? So we'll get to that. Okay, so arguments to prove the existence of the region of eternal glory, meaning Sri Vaikuntham, otherwise known here as Nitya Vibhuti. So Vibhuti means the glories. It means of the Lord. So he has two glories. He has this material world, which is called Leela Vibhuti, and which changes and goes through stages of creation, maintenance and destruction, and recreation, right, which are called Shristi, Stiti, and Laya or Pralaya. And he has the spiritual world, which doesn't go through those changes, which is eternally, here it's called the eternal glory, which is called Nitya Vibhuti. The word Nitya means eternal. So Vibhuti means glory, two glories of the Lord, the material world, the spiritual world. Okay. So then we have a recapitulation, right, or a summation of the book, the Vedas and what they really teach, right? So in the end of this book, he has an appendix. He has Sanskrit words and their transliteration into English, and he has some errata, which means that there may have been some printing mistakes, and he fixes them up. Okay, so let's start with the introduction. Sri Ramanuja's Vedartha Sangraha, introduction. So Bhagavan Ramanuja, it's quite common to use the word Bhagavan. Usually Bhagavan refers to God, because Bhaga means auspicious qualities, and Van means the one who has those auspicious qualities. So here it's being used for a saint, in this case Ramanuja. Bhagavan Ramanuja, and we can say Bhagavan Narada, but we can also use it for God. We can say Bhagavan Sriman Narayana, Bhagavan Krishna, Bhagavan Rama, Bhagavan Narasimha, like that. We can refer to any form of the Lord with the word Bhagavan. And similarly to great saints, we can also use this term Bhagavan. So Bhagavan, the great exponent of Vishishta Dvaita, the specified non-dualism or holistic non-dualism system of philosophy, is the author of 9 treatises. So he wrote 9 books, and here they are. More or less, he's going to give them here in their. We don't exactly know the order in which Ramanuja wrote the books, but this is a pretty good idea of the order in which the historical or the chronological order that Ramanuja wrote these books. Vedartha Sangraha, which is the one book that we're studying now, his first book. Pretty much everybody agrees that Vedartha Sangraha was the first book. Sri Bhashya, which is his magnum opus, his great, his most complex, his biggest book on the Vedanta Sutras, his biggest commentary. Vedanta Deepa, right, which is a little smaller, a little less technical, and Vedanta Sara, which is quite small and leaves out a lot of issues, right? The Gita Bhashya, the commentary on Bhagavad Gita. Then 3 prose works, right, called Vaikuntha Gajya, Sharanagati Gajya, and Sri Ranga Gajya, which actually I would put in the order: Sharanagati Gajya, Sri Ranga Gajya, and Vaikuntha Gajya last, and we've gone through those, and they seem to be in that order, and most people agree that is the order that Ramanuja wrote them in. And then finally, the book is the Nitya, which is a book of which deals with daily rites and duties that should be performed by every Sri Vaishnavite, specifically the daily worship of the deity or of Sriman Narayana in the form of shalagram or a murti in the house of every Sri Vaishnava. So among these, the Sri Bhashya is his most famous commentary on Badarayana, or otherwise known as Vedavyasa's Brahma Sutras. The commentary on the first sutra, right? The first sutra is Atato Brahma Jignasa is the first sutra or thread, or and is the first thesis right, is a lengthy thesis in which the author shows the untenability of rival systems of philosophy and expounds on a number of disputed passages in the Shrutis and Smritis. Again, Shrutis means the Upanishads, and Smritis means the other books like the Itihasas, Puranas, and other texts which were remembered. So Shruti means to be heard directly, the words of we can call them the words of God, the eternal Vedas, right? And Smriti, those which were remembered. So let's see that. The commentary on the first sutra, Brahma Sutras, is a lengthy thesis in which the author shows the untenability of rival systems of philosophy to Vedanta, right? And expounds a number of disputed passages in the Shrutis and Smritis, as well being in favor of his own system. Vedanta Sara and Vedanta Deepa, right, which are also on the Vedanta Sutras, but which are smaller by Ramanuja, are also commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, but are briefer than the Sri Bhashya and leave out the lengthy controversial discussions. They were evidently intended by the author to suit the average reader who is unacquainted with the methods of logical and interpretive disputation. So all of these methods of logical and scriptural interpretation have been worked out by the Purvamamsas, by the Karma Kandis, and they in fact have a whole system which has to be adhered to of how to understand the text logically and literally. So Vedartha Sangraha, which was written before Sri Bhashya, and which is referred to in the latter work. So we know that Vedartha Sangraha was written before Sri Bhashya because in Sri Bhashya he mentions Vedartha Sangraha, whereas it's not the other way around. And which is referred to in the latter work may be considered primarily as a dissertation on Vishishtadvaita doctrine to show that it is more in keeping with the spirit of the Vedas or the Shrutis than Advaita or Beta Beta. Right? So Vedartha Sangraha is there to tell you that the Shrutis or the Upanishads can be explained better by the system of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta than by Advaita or by the school of Advaita or Beta Beta. Yeah. Though this seems to have been the author's purpose, he's also appended to this discussion short essays on the validity of the Upanishads as a source of true knowledge, which had been questioned by the Mimamsakas, right? The Karmakandis had questioned whether the Upanishads are even important at all as a source of knowledge, right? Also, the truth concerning the supreme deity, whether it is Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, four-headed Brahma, Vishnu, Srimanarayana, or Shiva, Rudra, and the existence of a region of eternal glory, Nitya Vibhuti, Sri Vaikuntham, a transcendental world beyond this world of matter, where Narayana, Sriman Narayana, whom Ramanuja identifies as the supreme Brahman of the Upanishads, ever dwells with his consort, Sri Mahalakshmi or Sri Devi, and his attendants in his mansions of wonderful beauty and grandeur, and to which the souls of those that had attained release from the bondage of samsara proceed. So when the souls go to moksha, they proceed to that place. So Ramanuja also wants to prove that such a place exists. Right. So the other 5 treaties, right, are not wholly philosophical. Right. So we're talking about what? We're talking about the Gita Bhashya, the 3 Gajyas, right? Sharanagati Gajya, Sri Ranga Gajya, Vaikuntha Gajya, and the Nitya. They're not wholly philosophical. They're religious outpourings and not dissertations on the doctrines of Vishishtadvaita. So they are more theological than philosophical. And there's a slight distinction. We can, if anybody wants to discuss the difference between theology and philosophy, we can do that. Vedartha Sangraha, being controversial in nature, is written in the usual manner of philosophical disputations in Sanskrit literature. Dialectic subtlety and ingenuity of interpretation are of the very essence of such treaties. Occasionally, however, when the author has to speak of the glory of Narayana and his infinite compassion, he bursts into a rhapsody of devout fervor, which comes from the very depths of his soul, right? So when he has to describe Sriman Narayana in the course of writing this book, although it's a philosophical book and it's not meant to be theological in nature, right? He does use a lot of wonderful adjectives to describe Sriman Narayana here. While arguing his case against the Advaitins, the followers of Adi Shankaracharya, the monists, right, the exponents of other systems, Sri Ramanuja assumes that the reader is acquainted with their fundamental doctrines, right? So he assumes that when he writes this book. As also their interpretations of well-known passages of the Upanishads. The reader who has not such acquaintance is likely to find the discussion unintelligible, right? If you don't know about these passages or the different interpretations of them, or the different philosophies even, it'll be difficult to understand. In order to facilitate an easier understanding of the text, it may be necessary to present, in brief, the main doctrines of the systems of philosophy dealt with in this book. It is not the object, and that's what's going to be done in this introduction. It is not the object of this introduction to give a comprehensive study of Vishishtadvaita, or to summarize all the arguments employed by Ramanuja to refute rival doctrines. Its purpose is just to provide, as it were, the background of the controversial forum in order to enable the reader to follow the disputation in the text without much difficulty. So every system of Hindu philosophy except that of the Charvakas, right? So now we have to talk about that. The Charvakas are the materialists, Indian atheists, right? So as well as the 6 main schools of Indian philosophy which follow the Vedas, right? Which accept the Vedas, right? Again, they are Yoga, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva, and Uttara Mimamsa. So Sankhya is moralistic counting, or the Sankhya system there are different types of Sankhya also. There's the Sankhya, there's atheistic Sankhya and non-atheistic Sankhya. So Sankhya also that believes in God, which is accepted, right? And then Sankhya Yoga, which is the Patanjali's eightfold system of yoga, Astanga Yoga, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, etc., Samadhi. Then we have the Nyaya, which means Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Nyaya means logic, the school of logic, there's also a couple of different versions of the school of logic. There's the original school of logic, and then there's a new school of logic called Navya Nyaya. So then we have Vaisheshika, which is also another form of philosophy by Kannada. And then we have, after the Nyaya Vaisheshika, then we have the Purva and Uttara Mimamsa, which is the Karmakanda and the Vedanta. So ultimately, out of those 6 forms of philosophy, which all accept the Vedas as proof, those 6, Vedanta has more or less conquered. Vedanta has more or less conquered all of those other schools, right? Then apart from those schools, now those schools are called Astika. Astika means they follow the Vedas, like that. And then there are other schools which don't follow the Vedas. There are other schools of philosophy that came up in India which do not follow the Vedas. They don't accept the Vedas, and they try to refute the Vedas. So this is like Jainism, Buddhism, and Charvaka. Charvaka we have here. Charvaka is the Indian materialism, right? So Charvaka is basically doesn't believe in God and only believes in what he can see with his eyes or touch with his senses, right? So Indian materialism. Every system of Hindu philosophy, except for that of Charvaka, has a bearing on religion. Why does Charvaka not have a bearing on religion? Because he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in religion, and holds distinctive views on tattva, or the real nature of what we see around us, and of what we believe to be around us and within us, on purushartha, the goal or the aim of life, and on hita, otherwise known as upaya also, right? The means, the kind of means or upaya, which will enable us to attain that goal. So everybody except for Charvaka accepts this idea of 3 things which are 3 important subjects. First of all, what is reality? Second of all, what is the goal? Okay, I understand who I am, what I'm doing here, or why I'm here. So what is my goal in life? What's the real goal in life, right? And then how to reach that goal, right? So a brief account of these views held by the different exponents of rival systems is essential to a study of the controversial treatises of these points, right? So we have to have a brief view of tattva, hita, and purushartha, of reality, what is real, the goal, purushartha, and hita or upaya, the means to attain the goal. So tattva, our senses present to us a world with a wonderful variety of objects, men, beasts, birds, insects, worms, plants, and the like, as also inanimate things, such as the sun, the moon, the stars, each of its own peculiar qualities like color, form, flavor, fragrance, and the like. There are also objects not capable of being perceived by our senses, but believed to exist on the authority of scriptures. The question arises, are all these things that exist and are believed to exist real? If all of them are not real, are any of them real? If so, what are they? What are they? So with what we perceive and what we've heard of as being real, is it really real? So before answering this question, a preliminary definition of what is meant by real or reality has to be given, right? So if somebody says to you, well, is that real? Well, we have to define what you mean by real first. The Advaitins, or the followers of Shankara, the monists, the one who believe in oneness, which follow the teachings of Sri Shankaracharya, define reality as that which endures forever, for all time, without any change or modification whatsoever. So that's their definition of what is real. So if it doesn't endure forever for all time, without any modification or change, they don't believe that it's real. So in their view, whatever exists only for a short time is unreal, right? We would call it ephemeral, or we could call it fleeting, something which it exists right now, but next second it doesn't exist. Or after 100 years, it doesn't exist, or whatever time period. In their view, whatever exists only for a short time is unreal. It is a mere appearance or illusion similar to that which occurs, and here comes the analogy, when a serpent or a snake is seen by mistake in what is only a rope. So let's say we come into a room and the room is dark or dim. There's very little light there, and there's a rope lying on the floor of the room. And we don't see very well. We don't see completely. We don't see fully. We don't see correctly. But we just see the outline, this wavy outline. And we think it's a snake. It looks to me like a snake, like that. So we become afraid. Then we turn the light on. As soon as we turn the light on, we have proper perception. And we fully understand that rope that looked like a snake, there was an appearance of a snake, is really just a rope. So what they're saying is, that there's a mere appearance of certain things, an illusion similar to what happens when you mistakenly think that a rope is a snake in a dim room or a dark room. There is only one real, according to the Advaitins, according to the Mayavadis, the monists, the followers of Shankaracharya, which accords with their definition, and that is called Brahman. So they've heard about Brahman. They've read in the Upanishads about Brahman. Brahman means the supreme. Literally means the greatest, the great one, let's say, means the great thing or the great one, It alone lasts forever without change. So this is the philosophy of the Advaitins. It lasts forever and it doesn't change. The world that we see around us. So in other words, they're saying this rope, it was never a snake. It's only your vision that was a problem, that you couldn't see with the light off. You couldn't see that it was a rope. So that's an illusion. That's ignorance. you were ignorant of the true fact. The true reality is that that it was a rope. It wasn't a snake. Okay. So the world that we see around us is varied, right? It alone lasts forever without change, Brahman. The world that we see around us, so varied and so wonderful, is false and illusory appearance. This is termed by Adi Shankaracharya as Jagat Mithya. Jagat Mithya. This world is false. He says Brahman alone is true. This world is false. Brahma Satyam. Brahman is truth. Jagat Mithya. This world is false. This world is false. False in the sense, remember, that it doesn't exist all the time, right? That here they're trying to say it's an illusion. It's an illusion. Something which doesn't exist permanently is illusory. To them is unreal. So the world that we see around us, so varied, so wonderful, is a false or illusory appearance. So adhyasa is his name in Sanskrit for superimposition. Adhyasa, superimposed on the substrate. A substrate means the basic principle. The basic principle is Brahman. Right, Brahman is everything, and so Brahman is there, and Brahman is the only substance. But superimposed on top of Brahman is this illusion, or adhisthana. Adhisthana means the substrate or the principle. So adhyasa is the principle of superimposition. What is superimposed on top of Brahman is Maya or illusion, or avidya, ignorance, right? The two words that mean the same thing, basically, which alone is real, right? Namely Brahman. So the adhisthana, the underlying thing, Brahman, is real. What is superimposed upon it is not real. Brahman somehow becomes associated with a factor causing this illusory appearance, which is called Maya, or avidya. Ignorance or nescience or illusion. And the illusory world is seen superimposed on Brahman in the same way as the form of the serpent or the snake is superimposed on what is generally a rope. To this illusory appearance or creation is given a name by the Advaitins, by the Mayavadis. They call it Vedartha, right? So their understanding of the world is called Vaivartavad. Vad means, again, to speak. So Advaitins are not the only ones who talk about Vaivartavad or Vivartavad, but they are Vaivartavadins also, right? So there are other people who also believe that the world is, there are other schools which believe that the world is false, but we're talking right now about Advaita Vedanta of Shankara. The creation of the world means really the origin of the illusory appearance of the world on Brahman. So when we talk, the Advaitins say, well, when we talk about the creation of the world, that's simply when the illusion appeared. The illusion of this world appeared. If you ask the Advaitins, they will consider that the world which appears so real as illusory, so if you ask the Advaitins why they consider the world which appears so real as illusory, they will reply as follows. To sense perception or pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means sense perception, what I can feel, what I can see, what I can taste, what I can touch, all these things, right? The world seems real, but we know many instances in which pratyaksha misleads us into false knowledge or illusion. Illusion or false knowledge is called in Sanskrit Brahma. Not Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, but Bhrama, Brahma. Brahma means a mistake. It means a false knowledge or illusion, Brahma. So he given an example here of what is a mistake. We already gave you an example before. The serpent it's not a serpent, right? That was a mistaken comprehension. We tried to understand what was on the floor, but we looked and we didn't get a proper look, and so we thought it was a snake. It was actually a rope. So that was an illusion. That was a mistake. That was a Brahma. So the shell, sometimes we have a shell. So when you go on the beach, you see a shell. Inside the shell, it looks nice and shiny. It's called mother of pearl, right? This thing is called mother of pearl. It looks very shiny. It looks like silver. It looks like the color of silver. And sometimes we're walking on the beach and we see a shell and we think maybe somebody dropped a silver coin. but it's not really silver. It's shell, right? It looks silver, but it's not real silver, right? So the shell is often mistaken for silver by sense perception. The rope, as it has been stated before, is mistaken for the serpent or the snake. When in a moving railway train, so let's say we're in a train or even an airplane or whatever, and the passenger sees trees and other things moving. So you're in a car or a train, you look out the window and you see all these things moving past you very quickly, all these trees, houses, trees moving past you because you're moving in one direction. It looks like all those things are moving in the other direction, but actually they're not moving. They're actually stationary, and it's you that are moving. So the passenger sees the trees and other things as moving while the train seems to be stationary. From your point of view, the train is stationary because if you drop something, it drops straight down to the floor of the train. Like that doesn't go anywhere, doesn't move anywhere horizontally. It just moves vertically like that. When you walk, and you feel like, oh, I'm standing still. I'm on the train and I'm standing still. Everything else is moving. So this is an illusion. Actually, you're moving, and these other things are standing still. The trees and the houses that seem to be whizzing past by the window. The passenger sees the trees and other things as moving while the train seems to be stationary. It is only a little later that this mistake is realized and the false knowledge that the trees are moving is replaced by the truth. The truth is that you are moving and the trees are stationary. So also in the case of the world's reality, this is what an Advaitin will say, what a Mayavadi will say. So if you ask the Advaitin, if sense perception, right, seeing, feeling, touching, as you say, is deceptive and unreliable, is there any other means of knowing the truth? Right? So if we say that sense perception therefore is unreliable because what we see, what we feel, what we experience with our senses we can be fooled. We can have some mistake. We could be in some sort of illusion, right? So if that is considered to be wrong, that type of gaining knowledge, if we can't properly get knowledge by sense perception, then how do we do it? So he replies, the Advaitin says, certainly there is. The Shastra or the Shruti, the Veda, right, the scriptures, right, or the Upanishads, the knowledge of the Upanishads is always reliable and can give unmistakable knowledge of the truth of things. So this is accepted by all the schools of philosophy that accept the Vedas, all the 6 schools of philosophy that accept the Vedas, accept that there's truth in the Vedas beyond sense perception and beyond inference or logical, discussion. So the Shastra or the scripture is the sure and trustworthy means of knowledge. And it says that only Brahman is real and that all the rest, namely the world, is illusory. Now, this is what the Advaitins say. The Advaitins say that the scripture says this, especially the Shruti, the Upanishads. The Shruti says, and here the Advaitin is going to give you a quote from Chandogya Upanishad 3:14. All this, meaning the world that we see, is Brahman. All this is Brahman. Now remember that the Advaitin said that Brahman alone is real because Brahman never changes. But we see that in the world, things change. Many things change. So that must be an illusion because if that's really Brahman, it would never change. So this means that there is nothing else than Brahman. Right? So if there's nothing else than Brahman, right, then what we see must also be Brahman. So if we see it incorrectly and we think that it's a snake or we think that it's, instead of being a rope, if we're in some illusion, we make some mistake in our sense perception, then that is our fault, the fault of our senses, and not the fault of philosophy. In philosophy, it's understood that everything is Brahman, right? According to Chandogya, everything is Brahman. Everything is spirit. Everything's spiritual. Again, in the 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad, where Swetaketu is a sage is a rishi in the Upanishad, in Chandogya Upanishad, is taught what is the Sad Vidya. Sad Vidya. Sad means the eternal. Sat means eternal. Vidya means knowledge. And the Vidya, the different Vidyas in the Upanishads are methods by which, or meditations by which one can attain moksha or liberation, right? So he's taught a particular system here called Sadvidya or Satvidya. It is stated, this existed, my dear, as Sat at first, alone and without a second. So in the Chandogya, it also says that this, meaning Brahman, right, is called Sat or eternal. Remember, Brahman is always there, right? Never changes. So it's eternal. And it was the first and was alone without any second. So we have other examples in the Upanishad saying in the beginning there was one and the one later became many. But we have that Brahman is one, is supposedly one, according to Chandogya, right? This 6th chapter of Chandogya Upanishad. Sat here, Sat means Brahman. Sat means eternal, right? So it's another way of talking about Brahman, right? Because only Brahman is eternal, right? So, which is reality or true existence. So Satya means Brahman, which is reality or true existence. Again, this is all the interpretation of the Advaitins, right? We'll see later, we'll see what the Vishishta Advaitins and the other people, the Vaishnavas, other schools think about this. So Sat here means Brahman, which is reality or true existence. The word alone with and without a second clearly state that nothing else existed then. This means the world. This means the world. So the world didn't exist. So how did the world come about? The Advaitins say it's an illusion. So the objects that we see around us are only modifications and names which have no real existence, right? So for example, when we see the rope, it's really a rope, but we see it and we go, oh, it's a snake. So we give it a name, but that name is wrong because of our wrong perception. So we may call this the world, right? Is what the Advaitin, what the Mayavadi says. We may call this the world, but that name is wrong, and our perception of it is wrong because it's really a rope. It's not a snake. Okay, so the objects that we see around us are only modifications and names which have no real existence. No real existence means they're not eternal. The point is also thus illustrated. If you know a lump of mud, a lump of clay, right? A lump of clay, you have known all things that are made of clay, like pots or pitchers, right? Because the latter, the pots and the pitchers, are only forms and names which are unreal, right? So, for example, if we have gold jewelry, it comes from gold. If we understand gold, we understand gold jewelry because it's made out of gold. If we understand mud, we understand or clay, we understand the pots and the plates and the pitchers, the jugs that are made out of clay. Only the mud or the clay is real, right? Because the clay, it'll always be clay, right? If we break the pot, if we break the jug, if we break them and we grind them into dust and we add a little bit of water, it's again clay, like that, right? So like that. It's made out of clay and it goes back to being clay. In the beginning, it was clay. In the end, it's clay, like that. Even in the middle, it's clay, but it's transformed into jugs and pitchers and pots. Okay, so actually, what's eternal there? What's going on there is that it's always clay, but in maybe some different form, like that. So only the clay is real. Only the mud is real. In the same way, only Brahman is real, like the clay in the illustration of the pots and the jugs. And the world, with all the sentient and non-sentient entities in it. So all the matter and all the jivas, right, are just like the pots, or just like the snake or whatever. They don't have any reality because they don't exist eternally. This is what the Advaitins say, right? right? So in the same way, only Brahman is real, like the mud or the clay in the illustration. The world, with all sentient and non-sentient things in it, consists merely of illusory forms and names superimposed, again, that word is adhyasa, superimposed, this is the theory of adhyasa, onto Brahman. It's an illusion, right? The superimposition is caused by illusion or avidya or ignorance or nescience. So when the one, namely Brahman, right? Because the Upanishads talk about one. When the one, namely Brahman, is known, all the rest are known as well. Just like if you know gold jewelry. If you know clay, you know pots, right? Okay, and jugs. So anything made out of clay. So when the one, namely Brahman, is known, all the rest are known as well, right? So this implies that these other things do not exist in reality. The reality, again, meaning enduring forever, right? Again, continues the Advaitin. Could there be anything more emphatic than the teaching addressed in the same Shruti, in the same Upanishad, meaning Chandogya, to Swetaketu, namely the statement, the Upanishadic statement, that thou art. Okay, that in Sanskrit is called Tat Tvam Asi. Tat Tvam Asi. Asi is the verb to be. Tat means that. Tvam means you. So you are that. You are that, or that thou art. Right? That you are, right? That is called Tattvamasi. This is a favorite line from the Upanishads, which the Mayavadis pull out, and they say that you are. What does it mean? It means you are Brahman. You are Brahman. This world is Brahman. Everything is Brahman, right? Everything is one thing, Brahman. And not separate things like the jiva, like the world, like the universes or whatever, or God, even, or Vishnu or Rama or Sita or Brahma or Shiva, Ganesha, whatever it is. Everything is all one, Brahman. Okay, that's the idea. That thou art, you are that. Okay, so it states in no uncertain terms the identity between Brahman and the individual self. Between Brahman and the individual self. So there's individual selves or souls, but this is just an illusion that they're actually identical with Brahman. This is what the Advaitin says. He says that the individual selves have no reality on their own, and they are Brahman, right? To think that they are as an illusion is a mistake. So here, that of Swetaketu, right? The individual self here is Swetaketu. So Swetaketu is talked about in the Upanishad, but what's being taught to Swetaketu is that he doesn't actually exist, only Brahman exists. And the way to teach him that is by telling him, you are Brahman, that thou art, Tat Tvamasi, right? Okay. So in other Upanishads too, the same truth is taught in texts like, I am Brahman. Somebody in another Upanishad, so in Chandogya, Swetaketu was told, Tat Tvamasi, you are that, you are Brahman, you're Brahman. And another Upanishad, it says, Aham Brahmasmi. Again, Aham means I, Brahma means Brahman, the supreme Brahman, and Asmi means I am. So I am Brahman. So somebody's meditating, I am Brahman, I am spiritual, I am spirit, I am the supreme spirit. The only one thing that exists according to the Advaitins, right? Again, this is all what Adi Shankaracharya preaches, right? Teaches. The existence of anything other than Brahman, because remember in the Upanishads they quoted something and said that there's only one thing, and that's Brahman, right? We're going to see how this is explained by the Vaishnavas as we go along. The existence of anything other than Brahman is in the same way denied in many Shrutis, which say there is no such thing as plurality. There's no such thing as many. There's only one. There's only the one. And there are many statements in the Upanishads that say that. Neha nana asti kinchana. Right? Okay. The existence of the manifold world, right? When we look around, we see so many different things. We see trees and we see houses, we see people, we see universes, we see all these different things. No. The Upanishads say no. When you see plurality, that doesn't exist. Only one exists. So the existence of the manifold world is here stated to be false or illusory. So we see that, we feel that, we experience plurality, manifoldness, but it's an illusion according to the Advaitin. Okay. So that having understood that, at this stage, if the student of Vedanta asks the Advaitin, so somebody who wants to learn is talking to somebody who is a follower of Shankaracharya and Advaita and Mayavadi, and he says, well, what do you mean by Brahman, about which you say that it alone exists? What do you mean by Brahman, about which you say it alone exists? He replies as follows. I've already stated that the Shruti, the Upanishads, call it the only reality, right? The only reality, Satyam, truth. Truth. The truth is, right? Truth. Brahman, another name for Brahman, truth, right? Further, since the self within us, right, the soul, the Atman within us, called the Jivatman is said by the Shruti to be identical with Brahman, the supreme Brahman, right? And since the self is self-luminous meaning that the self and shines without any other aid, it is called chit. Chit means consciousness, okay? So in European philosophical terms, Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. So because we think, because we're conscious, we realize that we have existence. We realize that we exist because we are conscious. An unconscious entity like a rock or a tree, well, a tree is not a good example because a tree has some consciousness, but a rock, an inanimate object like a rock, cannot have consciousness, doesn't have consciousness. So it cannot think, it cannot realize that it exists. A rock, we may say the rock exists, but the rock itself cannot understand it exists. So here he was talking about the Jivatman, the soul within the body. The soul within the body has consciousness, and that consciousness illuminates its understanding of itself, right? So for example, if we have a lamp, and we light the lamp then shows us other things, but it also shows us the lamp. The lamp itself is seen by the light, right? So the soul itself is seen by itself because it has consciousness, because it's sentient. So it is called chit. The soul is, Jivatma is usually called chit. Chit can mean knowledge in Sanskrit. It also means consciousness, right? So here we could think of it as consciousness. Right. So further, since the self within us, the Jivatman or the soul, is said to by the Shruti to be identical with Brahman, and since the self is self-luminous, meaning it illuminates itself, right? It is conscious, so it can understand itself and shines without any other aid. It is called chit. That is, it is different from the non-sentient things like pots and cloths. Right, I said rock. Okay, so pots and cloths is what he's saying, which require to be lighted up by something else before they become manifest to perception, right? So in the dark, I can't see the rock, right? But in the dark, I still know that I exist because of my consciousness, right? So Brahman is sentience. So Brahman is sentient or sentience or consciousness. Or as the Shruti, the Upanishads call it, Jnanam. So above we had the first thing, we had Satyam, truth. Brahman is called in the Upanishads Satyam, truth. It's also called Jnanam, right? Knowledge, right? In the Taittiriya Upanishad, we have this Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, right? So it means Brahma is Satyam Jnanam Anantam, right? So this is in Taittiriya Upanishad. This is another Upanishad. The student might here interrupt the Advaitin with the question, if you say Brahman is consciousness or knowledge, right, as you say, right, it must be conscious of something else, right? So here's a test for the Advaitin, first test, right? He has said that there's only one thing, and he's quoted the Upanishads to say that there's only one thing. But the student, very smart student, has said to him, okay, I understood everything that you told me, and now you're talking about Brahman being conscious, but if Brahman is conscious, does it not mean that Brahman is conscious of something else? How can you say Brahman is conscious? Because in order to be conscious, you have to be conscious of something else, right? Either within you or without you. So there's two things, right? For a start, there's Brahman and there's consciousness. Secondly, there's Brahman and there's the thing that Brahman is conscious of, if Brahman has the quality of being conscious, right? And you said there was only one thing. So how come there's Brahman and consciousness? Brahman has a quality, right? Right? Because there's two things in philosophy. He's going to talk about it, that there's dravya and guna, right? So dravya means there's a substance, and guna means there's an attribute. So here he's saying that Brahman is consciousness. He's saying Brahman is consciousness, but we understand it to be Brahman has consciousness as an attribute. But the Advaitin will not admit that Brahman has consciousness as an attribute, because an attribute will be different from Brahman, right? For example, we have a brown cow, right? So if we have a brown cow, we have a cow which also is brown. Now, other things can be brown, right? So brownness exists outside of the cow, but this particular cow is brown. Cowness also exists apart from the brown cow. We can have white cows and black cows. So there's a white cow, a black cow, and a brown cow. That brown cow has cowness and also brownness, right? Has those two things. Whereas the black cow has cowness, the same as the brown cow, but it doesn't have brownness. It only has blackness. The white cow similarly also has whiteness, but not brownness. A thing which has brownness, or the quality of being brown, may not be a cow, right? So different dravyas or different things can share different attributes, right? But therefore that proves that the attributes and the thing is different, is not the same thing. So if you say there's only one thing, then how do you account for the fact that there are attributes and there are substances and attributes which are different, like that? So here he's saying Brahman is consciousness, but then the student is saying, well, if it's conscious, what is it conscious of? Is it only conscious of itself? I mean, what is the idea? And what is consciousness? Is consciousness separate from Brahman? Is it an attribute? So here we're going to get into this. We say we are conscious. So if Brahman is consciousness or knowledge, as you say, it must be conscious of something else. When we say we are conscious, we always mean that we are conscious of some object either within us or without it. Right. If there is any such object of which Brahman, which is consciousness, is conscious of, right, it would follow that there are other objects besides Brahman of which Brahman is conscious, right? So you said there's only one thing, Brahman. So then if Brahman is conscious, what is it conscious of? If it's conscious of something else, then there's two things. There's something else but Brahman, which goes against what you first said. The Mayavadi first said there was only one thing, right? So now, besides Brahman, of which Brahman is conscious, the Advaitin in reply, so his reply to this question, which is a challenging question for the Advaitin, right? Is ready with his reply to this objection. Brahman, he says, the Advaitin says, Brahman is true, is consciousness, but it is not conscious of anything else, for there is no such thing of which it could be conscious. It is pure consciousness without any discriminating feature, like the consciousness of a pot or a cloth or the like. So it has no discriminating features. It is just pure consciousness. There is an instance of such consciousness experienced by every one of us almost every day. In our waking hours, when we're awake, we are conscious of the external world and of the thoughts and feelings within us. When we go to sleep and dream, swapna, the word here is swapna in Sanskrit, meaning dreaming, right? We are conscious of a world of illusory shows and phantasms. But when we are in very deep sleep, without dreaming of anything else, right, or in like a coma, right, this is called shushupti, which is the state after the dissolution of the material universe. The living beings are in this deep sleep state. So we have the waking state, the dreaming state, shushupti state, right? This is deep sleep, right? Not dreaming, right? There is consciousness, pure and alone, for otherwise the man would be said to have died. And yet the sleeper is conscious of, and the sleeper is not conscious of anything. When a person's in a coma, he's not conscious of anything. Similarly, when a person is in this state of sushupti, deep sleep, right? Not swapna, not dreaming, right? He is not conscious of anything, right? So it's pure consciousness. So this is the example given by the Advaitin. Okay, that is why Taittiriya Upanishad says Brahman, Satyam, says of Brahman, it says Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. This is a statement from Taittiriya Upanishad. Okay, so this is where we get this idea of in apposition, words in apposition. Somebody, the Advaitin will say Brahma or Brahman is truth, Satyam, Jnanam, knowledge, and Anantam, infinity, right? Truth, knowledge, infinity, right? And they're all Brahma, like that. But the person who's not an Advaitin will say Brahma has these attributes of truth, knowledge, and infinity, right? So Brahman is reality, consciousness, and infiniteness. You see what Ananta means. Brahman is everywhere, and there is nothing else, right? So if Brahman's everywhere, there's nothing else. The student of Vedanta is likely to put the following question at this point, right? Now, do you mean to say that Brahman has these three attributes, reality, consciousness, and infiniteness? Is the Shruti, right, the Upanishads that you quoted just now, a definition of the nature of Brahman, right? So the student is saying, okay, you just said Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That's a quote from Taittiriya Upanishad. Is that a definition of Brahman? That it's truth? That it has the attributes of truth, knowledge, and infiniteness? Right? That's what he's asking. So the Advaitin hastens to correct the misapprehension in the following words. No. He says, no, Brahman has no attributes or qualities, has no attributes. Then why is it called Satyam Jnanam Ananta Brahma? Weird. So if it had, there would be not only Brahman, but the attributes as well, right? But the Shrutis, or the Upanishads, clearly say Brahman is one without a second. Further, there are texts in the Shrutis, in the Upanishads, which expressly state that Brahman is without any parts, right? It's not one thing that has parts. It's one homogeneous thing. It's one thing which is completely the same and which has no qualities and no attributes, right? And is pure consciousness. Okay, so this, when Brahman is spoken about as having no parts, it's called Niravayava. So Niravayava, no parts. Without any activity, has no activity. Brahman is no parts, no activity. Nishkriya. So nir and nish, this means without. Right? Nirguna, without qualities. Right? And without qualities. Nirguna, or differentiating features, beta. Without difference, without qualities, without activity, and without parts. Brahman is like that. According to the Advaitins, according to the Mayavadis, this is their idea. So it can be described only in negative terms, right? So the Advaitins say you can't describe Brahman in positive terms. You can't say it has this, it has that, it has that. You have to say it doesn't have, because it doesn't have anything, right? This is understood. There are some places in the Upanishads where this is said. So in negative terms. So in Sanskrit, when we say it's not this, it's not that, it's not the other, we say neti, 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 na iti, na iti, na iti. Na means not. It is thus not, it is thus not, it is thus not. So you see the Advaitins, whatever you say, oh, is Brahman this, is Brahman that, is Brahman the other? If you ask an Advaitin, you say, neti, 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 not that. No, no, no. That's why he started his answer with no, no, no. No, whatever you think Brahman is, it isn't, right? It is pure consciousness. It has no parts. It has no qualities. It has no activity. Okay? It has no differentiation. So it can be described only in negative terms, is what the Advaitin says. It is not this. It is not this. Neti, neti. He put it here. What then do you mean, the student asks, by Satyam, Jnanam, and Anantam, if they are not attributes? I mean, this is a good question, right? If we have to accept the Taittiriya Upanishad says Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. So what does that mean then? What does that mean? If they're not attributes of Brahman, what are they? Right. So the Advaitin asks, so what do we need by Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam if they're not attributes? The Advaitin answers, and he says, when the Shruti, right, when the Upanishads say Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, it means to say that Brahman is not. Okay. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, up until now, I was following what the Advaitin was saying, but right now, Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, how does that mean Brahma is not those things? It's weird, very, very strange. But he's saying it means that Brahman is not. Okay, Brahman is other than the unreal, right? That's another way of saying that's a double negative. Brahman is not unreal. So therefore, Brahman is real, right? Right? Or non-existing. So what is non-existing? Brahman is not non-existing. Brahman exists, right? So it's called Satyam. It is not unreal. It's not unreal. It's a double negative, right? Instead of saying Brahman is real, he's saying he's describing Brahman as not unreal. Okay, Brahman is other than unreal or non-existing. So therefore it's Satyam, it's true. It is other than non-sentience. It is other than ignorance. It is other than illusion. Therefore it is jnanam or knowledge, right? It is other than infinity. It is other than finiteness. Therefore it is infinite or anantam. So it is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. That's what he says. That does not mean three different attributes. The three negatives mean only a single thing, Brahman. Right? Describing Brahman in this way means there's only one Brahman. So if these words mean three different attributes, it would follow that there are three objects or substantives, visheshas. Visheshas, substantives. I said dravya, but he's saying here vishesha. That's fine. Of which there are attributes, visheshana. So in Vedantic terms, he's talking about visheshas and visheshana. Vishesha means the substance, and visheshana means the attribute. So he's saying if these words were considered, the Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, if these Satyam, Jnanam, Ananta were considered to be attributes of Brahma or related to Brahma in that way, it would follow that there are three objects or substantives, three things of which they are attributes, right? But there is only Brahman. According to our Advaita doctrine, the Mayavadi says, Brahman is knowledge or consciousness, not the possessor or knower of knowledge. Let me say that again. According to Advaita, Brahman, the supreme Brahman, right, which is the only thing that exists, right, the only true thing, the only real thing, right, is pure knowledge and consciousness, but not the possessor or knower of any knowledge. Okay? It is infiniteness and not the possessor of infiniteness. Similarly, it is reality and not the possessor of reality. Okay? So it's reality, it's infiniteness, it's knowledge, but not the possessor of those things. It doesn't have those things as its attribute. This is a little difficult to understand. If something possesses, if something is not the possessor of those things, then how can those things be equated to it? Okay, so let's see what he says. Some Shrutis add ananda, which means bliss, right? Supreme happiness to these. So we have satyam, jnanam, anantam, and anandam, right? Also, so some Shrutis, some Upanishads add anandam to these three words already quoted in this Shruti and from Taittiriya Upanishad. It means that Brahman is other than dukkam, or pain or misery. Brahman is other than pain or misery. It is anandam, or bliss, which is the opposite, right? We have sukham and dukkam. So dukkam means misery, sukham means happiness. So here the word anandam is used because anandam is the greatest sukham, the greatest bliss. Okay, so we have satyam, jnanam, anantam, anandam. These are all said to be Brahman by the Advaitin. But he says that Brahman doesn't possess those qualities. Those are not qualities or attributes that Brahman possesses. Brahman is those things only. Because he won't accept that there are these two things. There's the substance and the attribute. Okay, because if he admits that there's a substance and attribute, then his original idea that there's only one thing is wrong, right? So he has to say this. Okay, so now, from what has been said so far, it may become clear that Advaita in its purest and most uncompromising form, which is called Kevala Advaita, which is what Adi Shankaracharya preaches, does not recognize the real existence of anything other than Brahman. Then, what about the world of sentient and insentient things which are said to exist? Advaita recognizes three orders or degrees of existence. So in Advaita, they recognize different forms of existence, different levels of existence, let's say, right? So existence is called satta. Sat means eternality, so satta means existence. So one is transient or temporary existence or appearance or existence. Transient or temporary, right? This is called pratibhasika satta, like that of the serpent which appears in the rope as an illusion. So we can say when the light is dim or off, the rope, there appears to be a serpent there. So that is a form of existence. That is a form of existence called pratibhasika satta, like the serpent that appears in the rope as an illusion. In a few minutes, the illusion disappears, or as it is termed, is sublated by true knowledge when we turn the light on. Far higher or superior is the existence of the world with all of that it contains. It is real for all practical purposes. This is called vyavaharika satta, right? The material world. This existence persists as long as the jivatman is in bondage, is bound in samsara, in this world of birth and death, is in ignorance, right? But when the atma reaches moksha or mukti, the world disappears like another illusion, and the pure atma shines alone without a second, right? This atma, which is the same as Brahman, is the only true paramartika satta. So we have these three levels here: paribhasika, vyavaharika, and paramartika. Three levels.
Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Narayanaya.